Welcome to the College Admission TV Presidential Podcast. We sit down with passionate leaders in higher education for their thoughts and insights in today's world. We are excited to have as our guest Dr. Gene Fant Jr., President of North Greenville University in Tigerville, South Carolina.
Well, I always like to start off with your journey. And I'd love to understand, who are the mentors that really helped shape your path? And you can go back as far as you want, but who are the mentors that really helped shape your path to become the president of North Greenville?
I love talking about mentors. I'll also say sometimes there were some tour mentors along the way, and you learn as much from them sometimes as you do the mentors. In fact, I was meeting with some students this morning, and that's one of the things that I said was sometimes you don't mention the people that you've used as negative examples, so to speak, but positive examples too. Maybe three in particular. My dad actually was one. He was pastor of a large church. Was a very gifted administrator. He's still with us, lives in San Antonio with my brother. But Dad was a very talented leader, and he operated very much out of a platform of love, that he loved the people who were around him as he served on committees and leadership things out in the community and denominational life. That was something that I really very much learned from him, was that if you love the people you're serving, they can feel that. And that creates a really positive culture and energy that I think pays dividends. Second guy I would say is David Dockery. He's probably my biggest professional mentor. He's three-time president. He was president at Union in Tennessee when I came there as English department chair, and then ended up moving up the ladder there. English chair, dean, vice president, executive vice president. And Dr. Dockery is just the consummate academic leader and professional, and learned so much about him. A big thing that I learned about him was stewardship, that leaders inherit institutions and then one day hand those institutions off. We used to talk a lot about track metaphors and passing batons and things like that. And then he's one of the most incredibly strategic people about helping others to connect with opportunities. Nothing brings him more joy than connecting someone he knows with an opportunity. And that's very much the way I'm wired. I was in a meeting yesterday and had the opportunity to share a name with someone. Somebody mentioned they were looking for somebody with a very specific background. And I said, holy cow, I actually know somebody. Pulled up a website, gave it to him, and away we went. And then the third one would be Carla Sanderson. Also at Union at that time. She was the chief academic officer. I served for two different levels under her, and then served alongside her as executive vice president. She has a background as a trauma nurse, and her ability to make decisions under pressure was incredible. And that was a fascinating thing to learn. So you got love, you got stewardship, you've got intentionality and strategy. Those are some really important things. I could add another half dozen, but those are some who are on the forefront of my mind right now.
So now, are you able to teach? Because I know that you were a part of faculty a while back, or is too much time taken as far as being president, your responsibilities there?
My answer to that is I teach every student on campus.
There you go.
Because that was a real transition. When I stopped being the department chair and I became dean, pretty quickly I realized that my days of teaching were going to be limited, just because it's so hard to keep up. It's not just the grading, it's the prep time for students to get their money's worth, and you to be providing them with what they really deserve as paying customers who are being academically guided by you. But I very quickly made peace with that, because I started realizing I really am a part of hiring all the faculty members. And so even though I'm a 17th century poetry specialist by trade, I also teach, by extension, business classes and theology classes and education classes and physician assistant classes, and you name it. I do a fair amount of guest lecturing and also some special lectures at other institutions. I do a fair amount of supervision of research and so forth, both here and at other, like doctoral programs, doctoral committees. I do that. So that still keeps me engaged with the students, and I really enjoy that. I do miss the classroom, but I feel like I'm doing what I'm designed to do. And being a teacher, having that experience as a teacher allows me to be, I think, a very different kind of administrator. In fact, the institution I serve at, North Greenville, has only been a 4-year institution for about 30 years. And so when they hired me, one of the things the board said is we really need somebody with an academic background to go back and make sure we have touched all the bases. And really the first couple of 3 years I was here, that was part of what we were trying to do, was to make sure we really had everything spick and span for our accreditor, for being up to date, for being forward looking in terms of how we're preparing students for the future. And so that classroom experience certainly has come in handy along those lines.
So, what was there a specific moment, or was it over a period of time when you realized that, hey, I'm interested in anthropology, which is where you earned your bachelor's degree at James Madison?
Yeah.
And then I always enjoy hearing, when we look at English, I'm a journalism major, I love to write. I'd like to think I'm a decent writer, but I enjoy it. So do you remember the moment when you thought, hey, anthropology is the path for me? Or even you had mentioned, on the English side, was there a teacher that you could say, gosh, that's why that's why I'm getting my undergrad here. That's why I'm getting my master's here.
Oh, there are crazy stories with this. So I do not remember a time in my life when I did not think I was going to be an anthropologist. We have the little book from second grade, What I Want to Be When I Grow Up. And it says, I want to be a paleontologist or archaeologist, subfields of anthropology. High school student paper, there's actually an interview with me about wanting to be an archaeologist and study anthropology. Then senior year of college, as I was really wrestling with what that looked like, it's a long story, but ended up deciding I wanted to be a creative writer and songwriter. And my mom's in the music business, and so that's not that crazy of a thing. Started winning some songwriting contests and flipped that over into the master's in English and creative writing. Taught high school English for a little while, knew I wanted to go on and do more graduate work. But I just thought, I'll end up being, I always wanted to be a professor, archaeologist, research, whatever professor. So it got flipped over a little with the literature. And then as I was finishing my doctorate, I ended up intersecting with some people who started talking to me about the administrative path. Even when I worked at Jack in the Box as a 16-year-old, they pulled me into being a shift manager on the weekends. And so even way back then, I guess people identified in me some administrative skills, management skills. And I really didn't think anything else about that until I was finishing my PhD. And some very, very special people started talking to me about my future and things they saw that might be possible.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about North Greenville University. You've got roughly 2,100 students. Is that fair to say?
Depending on how you count, somewhere between 21 and 24.
And so how big can you get? How big do you want to get?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're actually working off of, I think, a fairly unique model. We do not carry any long-term interest-bearing debt. It's not that our board is debt averse, but we're watching other institutions become heavily leveraged, and then the leveraging makes decisions for them. And so the idea is here in Tigerville, which is a beautiful location, we are basically 25 to 30 minutes from 6 different towns that are substantial towns with great opportunities for students. We have 31 waterfalls within an hour of campus, if you can imagine that. The views out my window of the Blue Ridge are just gorgeous. Here in Tigerville, we think we'd like to be at about 1,800 students, something along those lines. We are structured with infrastructure to be able to handle that. We could have a few dorm rooms that are a little bit nicer, so we're working on some projects with that. But for us to get beyond that level, say 1,800, we would have to take on a substantial amount of capital debt, and we just don't want to do that. And post-pandemic, it's really underscored the opportunity for non-traditional. And so the idea is if we could be at 1,800 in Tigerville, deeply cultivating community and connectedness with what we're doing internally with residential, but then augment that with the non-traditional students with graduate online. We have a very large physician assistant program that's very strong and has really been a difference maker for us. If we could have about 1,200 to 2,000 students in that non-traditional platform. The two of those things complementing each other would be a really good size. And so what I'd rather do is, instead of raising money for capital investments in Tigerville, I'd rather raise money for scholarships so that we can keep that cost down. What we tell families is, we don't do debt, so you don't have to do debt. And so trying to keep those costs down is a really important part of our puzzle. And then getting donors to come alongside us and provide scholarships for students to help keep that down is very much a part of what we're doing. So it's a nice balance, keeping that residential, but also being able to get off campus through the non-traditional online and alternate delivery, asynchronous delivery models has also worked well for us. And we really are seeing this play out in a way that looks like it's going to be very sustainable in a saturated market.
Well, and this is going to be a general question, so take this whichever direction you want to go. But when you look at competition, the competition out there is fierce for students. So how does North Greenville compete and win?
It's a great question about how you compete in a saturated market. I was deeply influenced by Truett Cathy, the guy that started Chick-fil-A, and have been involved with a lot of things connected with the company. And there's a very notable event that happened at Chick-fil-A about 15, 20 years ago. They were looking at the company Boston Market, and they were saying, how are we going to compete with them? The chicken market is saturated. The meal market is saturated. Boston Market is eating our lunch, so to speak. And so there was a very famous meeting that they had where they were arguing about how they could compete. What are we going to do? It's saturated. The margins are so thin and everything. And finally, Truett interrupted the meeting and said, gentlemen, if we focus on the competition, we're going to lose. If we focus on who we are and quality, people will demand that we grow in the market. And we're trying to do that as well. There are a lot of places that do splashy things, but to get there, they're doing it with leveraged debt. They're doing it with huge bond issues. They're doing it by jacking up tuition and so forth. And so we feel like what we're trying to do is take the long view towards sustainability, that when I hand off the institution down the road, there's that stewardship and leadership mantra. When we hand off the institution down the road, that we'll be handing off something that's very stable, very sustainable, and that will allow us to be able to stay focused. And so it's really hard sometimes, especially in a saturated market. You see those headlines and you're like, doggone it, we got to keep up with that. But keeping the main thing is really important. So focusing on our mission, focusing on whom we serve, focusing on partnerships, constantly doubling down on those long-term statistics, long-term data, and so forth that allow us not to be distracted by the shiny or the threatening. Understand what those things are and adapt and respond where necessary. But to keep the main thing is, we think, what's going to ultimately allow us to be able to not just remain competitive, but to thrive. Mm-hmm.
So how do you make sure that students are career ready, especially in an environment where, a job today may not exist in 5 or 10 years and vice versa?
One of the guys I grew up with was on the design team that invented the Palm Pilot, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
I think back about the time we spent as children in his basement watching Star Trek. And sometimes I think, hey, man, give me a little slice of that, those royalties or whatever. But I remember reading an interview with him. I think it was in the San Francisco Chronicle. He said, no one could ever have gotten me as a kid to major in product design or whatever. He said, but the things that I learned and the internships that I had were the things that prepared me to take advantage of the opportunity. And so we do a lot at North Greenville with internships. We do a lot with community services, actually one of the best internships you can do. And so if you're an accounting major and you're doing an internship or you're volunteering with a community organization and you're figuring out how they do finances and so forth, that's an incredible internship. You may not get paid for it. You may not be thinking that that's an internship, but community service often will expose you to things that will end up coming back to your advantage once you get into the career. The other thing is we talk a lot about social capital, and it's not just that kids are career ready in terms of skills, in terms of internships, but it's also teaching them how to leverage social capital through networking and friendships and so forth. The reality is that most people, they may get an entry level job that's from some basic posting, but often what will happen is their careers develop and they build out those networks is someone will send them a link. I sent a link to somebody just yesterday. Hey, here's a job I thought about you, thought this might be something you need to look at. And so that social capital that comes from strong relationships, strong networking, the skills that you pick up through doing internships, and then frankly, just talking about things like work habits. We talk about that a lot, that if you show up on time, you're capable and competent in what you're doing, you don't steal, you don't show up under the influence, you'll be amazed at how quickly you'll advance. And it's the number one thing that I hear actually from employers. They can work on skills, they can't work on work habits. The work habits have already got to be there. It's hard for an employer to really assert that. And a lot of our students are first generation students. And so a lot of them see that they have a real opportunity that's a distinctive opportunity. And so being positioned for those kinds of things is really important to a lot of our students because they do see that ultimate benefit that's looming just out there after graduation.
Well, I do think congratulations are in order. You are now part of the South Carolina Higher Education Commission.
Yeah.
And so, to that end, can you talk a little bit about maybe the top one or two challenges that face higher education in South Carolina, and what is being done to help create opportunities and access for students and families in the state?
Yeah, it's a little strange to have one foot on the private side, my biggest foot on the private side, the independent college side, and then to have the incredible honor to serve on the public side on the commission. This is the coordinating board in South Carolina for all 30 of our publics, technical colleges, all the way up to Clemson and Carolina, the flagships. And the thing that we work on the public side in particular is workforce development. This is a huge initiative the governor has put out. And so a lot of our time is spent working on demographics, working on what's happening relative to the economic development things in the state. The governor has absolutely prioritized that. South Carolina is in an unusual position because we are one of the states that is a growing state, partly because of relocation. The relocations, interestingly, everybody, I think, thinks that South Carolina is attracting a lot of retirees, and we certainly are. But we're also attracting a lot of people to the state who are still working and are still very engaged. And they're bringing energy and expertise to the state that I think is a really unusual opportunity. And so particularly the governor has challenged us to not just be thinking about what's going on right now. We're in a boom economy right now, but also challenging us to think about what happens 5 years down the road when we've saturated our infrastructure and maybe things are happening a little different economically. How do we think about being lean? The time to think about being lean is not when you got to be lean. It's when you have the opportunity to become lean. And that's been a fascinating conversation for us to be able to have, because again, right now, South Carolina is just unusually positioned with companies relocating, people relocating. The economy is so strong, so robust. But that is a great time to not be deceived and think that it's always going to be that way. And so to think through how do we become more efficient, more effective, sustain that as long as we possibly can. But to think also more long term, what does the future look like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now? I think with the rise of AI and things like that, we are going to really see a lot of changes, not just in workforce, certainly, but in higher ed as well, and in the options for higher ed as we move forward over the next decade and a half.
Yeah, speaking of AI, my family was at Disney World last weekend, and we went to Magical Kingdom, which it resembles Disneyland, and it's just phenomenal. I mean, my kids love it. I love it. But then when you go to kind of the Star Wars theme park, beautiful, it was great, but all the rides were very AI driven. It was really interesting because you had roller coasters, but a lot of them were screens moving around based on how you reacted. So it's neat to see that the evolution, even at Disney and Star Wars. When you look at, you had talked about relationships and how important relationships are. How is North Greenville connecting students with alumni?
Some of our alumni are the best mentors that we possibly have. Up until recently, most of our students came from our home county, Greenville, or the contiguous counties. We are really getting outside of that now. But the good news is for those students that are coming from outside of the state or outside of the region even, or outside of the country, because we do have a fair number of international students, the good news is that a lot of those long-time relationships we have with alumni, they are here and they want to pass on the knowledge they have. They want to mentor. They often will use the phrase adopting, that they want to adopt students and connect them out. And so whether it's alumni who are in athletics, who are coming alongside student athletes and saying, I played football here, I played baseball here, I played basketball here. Let me talk to you about my experience as a student athlete and how that prepared me for whatever. Or students in the fine arts, we have phenomenal fine arts programs here, music, art, theater, communication, all of those, we have deep connections with people who are able to position them. Again, sometimes it turns into internships and so forth. But that connectedness, this is a very cross-generational community. Even though we've only been a four-year school for about 30, 35 years, interestingly, we'll have first-generation students who are the fourth in their family to come to the university, which is very, great-grandpa went to the academy for ninth grade and then transferred. Somebody went to the junior college and so forth. And because there's that cross-generational thing, it's also a function of the upstate. The upstate, because of the manufacturing and mills and the mill communities, the upstate has always been very welcoming to people who are not from here, because there's always been people that have been transferring and so forth. And so our alumni very much reflect that cross-generational, very welcoming, very community-oriented mindset. And so helping students get connected with that is just a tremendous opportunity for students to learn from people that have gone down the road a little bit ahead of them, but also have maybe some shared experiences just from setting foot on the soil here.
Well, and I'm sure, just as you described, alumni help build and establish the brand of North Greenville, maybe beyond the region. But how difficult is that to be able to build a pool of students and potentially staff and administrators, outside your quote unquote region, whatever that might be, 60 miles, 100 miles. When you go beyond that, how difficult is that to make sure that your brand resonates?
Yeah, it's intentionality, and that's been historically a challenge because we were so home focused. When I came, I asked for them to give me some research on which counties, all the way down to which churches, which schools, so forth, were ones that were feeders for us. And so when I came, we expanded it. I called it the triangle target, basically from Raleigh, Durham, the research triangle, all the way down to Charleston, essentially I-95. From Charleston all the way to Knoxville, basically I-26, and then back over Knoxville to the triangle with Charlotte in the middle of that. We started really identifying where we had alumni in those areas and reaching out to them, did a lot of road shows, so to speak, where I would go and have dinner or lunch. As I was out and about, we had about a half dozen staff members who really intentionally worked that. We discovered we had a lot of people in Atlanta. Now we've discovered we have a ton of people in Houston, a lot of people down in Jacksonville. Florida has been interesting because Floridians have discovered that South Carolina is a little like Florida, except we have 4 seasons. We've got 10 or 11-month golf. And even from here, we can be on the beach in Charleston in 3 hours and 45 minutes, believe it or not. And so getting connected outside of the area has been really good, not just for bringing us students, but also for giving students opportunities for jobs and things like that, because we do get a lot of people who are in our network, but outside of our region that'll call back in and say, hey, I've got this great opportunity. Do you guys have anybody? In fact, a gentleman I had lunch with yesterday, this is inside South Carolina, but had lunch with a gentleman yesterday. It was we had no other relationship except he had hired one of our alums about a year ago and was so blown away by that guy. He wanted to meet me and hear more about what was going on at the university. And again, this is something not it's not that far. It's in the state, but outside of our natural area. And this person's actually not from the Southeast; he's from the Midwest, and really didn't know much about us. And so, as we get those stories out, I'm an English guy. I'm a storyteller, a little raconteur. As we get the story out and we hear stories that we can then repeat, that really is of great benefit to us. And I'll also add, personally, it's a huge encouragement to me because I love hearing people's stories about what has happened at the university 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago. And to hear how that story is played out, it's really encouraging.
Well, and that kind of leads to my next question around fundraising. When you meet someone that is blown away by one of your alums, that helps, because you can really expand upon that story. But what would be some of the key successful points? How do you fundraise successfully? Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Well, the key to when I was at Palm Beach Atlantic in Florida, I worked for Bill Fleming, who was the president there and had been a longtime advancement guy. And the number one thing he would always say is fundraising is storytelling. That's what it is. You're telling the story. You're not manufacturing stories. You're not manipulating stories. Good stories sell themselves, so to speak, in the eyes of philanthropists. But good stories connect emotionally. And I watched Dr. Fleming really meet with people, tell these stories. And again, it's not emotional manipulation. It's emotion as a very natural overflow. And as I tell some of the stories that I know of from this place, I'll give you an example. I had a guy I was meeting with, he and his brother both graduated from here, and they talked about that when they were students, their dad let them have a certain part of the farm they could raise cotton on. And as long as I think they said, as long as they could get 500 pounds of cotton off that part of the farm, it would be enough to pay their tuition for the year. And as guys like that and their families are talking about how they can help students, they don't want students to have to chop cotton for a week in October. They'll say, God has blessed me with resources. How can I help a student out? And stories like that, they just are so meaningful. And being able to share those stories and connect those stories, as a president, I've got to have a whole portfolio of stories because you do customize based on the people you're working with and all that. But here's what I know about donors through doing this for some time now. Donors, especially in our context as a Christ First school, donors really feel that they've been blessed and they want to be a blessing to others. And they actually feel a burden, especially the ones with significant resources. They really feel a burden for that about how can these be used well? How can they be stewarded well? How do I know they're not going to be wasted? How do I know that I'm not going to make it too easy for a kid? Because sometimes I think kids that end up getting handed too much to them without work end up not having good work habits and end up really just kind of wandering after they graduate. And so having donors that really feel that, being connected with the opportunities for students to be able to grow and be nurtured as opposed to being spoiled, so to speak, that's a pretty great opportunity, and donors really resonate with that.
So, I feel like the value of higher education is being challenged, maybe more so today than it ever has. How do you make sure that when you're speaking to a parent or a student, that you really can impress upon them the value of earning a degree, but also, as you've alluded to, the value of education in general?
Well, there are so many ways to parse it. First off, I always tell families, I don't personally think everyone should go to college. I think we've oversold college through the years. I think actually one of the reasons we have a student debt problem is because we've been overselling college to some extent. And in fact, a lot of kids end up going to college a year or two, getting student loans and not getting a degree. And so they're not able to service that debt with a higher degree and all that. I love the trades. I am from a family of people who love to work with their hands, and I celebrate that. If my son had come to me and said he wanted me to help him get a dump truck and do that, that would have been phenomenal. In fact, I would have liked riding around in it, I think. But there are things that college does provide for students who are bent that way, equipped that way. It certainly does change what you're doing relative to job preparation. And obviously there's earning potential. We just had a study that came out, I think, last week that reinforced what is substantially different relative to the average college graduate versus the average high school graduate. And of course, there are lots of exceptions to all of that. But the big thing that I tell people, especially with 18 to 22-year-olds, is when you are able to participate in a traditional college, in particular with a residential aspect, there is something that happens in that community that really changes you. I had a mom call me, this is ages ago. I had a mom call me. She was really upset because her pre-med son had changed his major to English. And so she was upset. She wanted to meet me in my office. And as we started talking about it, finally, I knew a little bit about the young man. And after she had expressed her dissatisfaction with this, I finally said, "Hey, what's your son's GPA?" And she said, "I think it's about a 1.8." And I said, "Well, he's not pre-med if he's a 1.8. And I said, "How's he doing in his English classes so far?" And she said, "Well, I think he's actually carrying a 4.0. And I said, "Isn't it possible that that's the way he's designed and that he's going to thrive if he's in alignment with that?" And that kind of a conversation would never have happened outside of this sort of a setting, where again, I constantly remind everyone, it's not just that you are making decisions about what's going on, but you're being influenced by faculty members who know you. Maybe you babysit for them. Maybe you're in a Sunday school class with them. Maybe you're working at a community service project with them. But you got faculty members who are doing this. You've got staff who are doing this. You have coaches who are doing this. And then the powerful one that we forget about is you've got peers. Peer pressure works two ways. We talk about peer pressure as a negative, but I believe peer pressure is an incredible positive as well. When you have friends who are getting to know you, and maybe you're living in dorms and playing intramurals and going to movies or going to plays or whatever the case may be. It's those conversations that happen with your roommates, your suite mates, your friends, maybe at 1 or 2 in the morning at Waffle House or coming back to the dorm from Waffle House. Those are conversations that are just unbelievably valuable. And that's something that you don't get if you go straight into some of the non-college opportunities that the kids have. By the way, I'll also add that sometimes is what happens with kids who end up going into the military. I'm a big fan of kids going into the military. Again, they pick up that community, they pick up that mentorship and all. And so I think every kid is different. I hate centralized planning where we've got other people that are trying to figure out how people they don't know should live their lives. I think the better we can connect young people with people who do know them and who want what's best for them to be able to speak into their lives like that, man, that's a tremendous opportunity. And college is one of those places where there's a lot of intentionality around that.
So where do you see North Greenville in 10 years?
Well, first off, I'd like to think that a lot more people will know about us. And so, I think we're going very much from being a place that has had a large outsized impact beyond just this region. But I think that as we're seeing people find out more and more about us, that they're really impressed with the students that we turn out, with the values that we try to project out into the workforce, into our communities and all. What I hope that people will say about us, we talk about equipping transformational leaders for church and society. What I hope out in the future is that people will see us as a leader in community agencies, nonprofits, and so forth, the community aspect of that motto and the church aspect of that motto, where you'll see this, people will say, well, tell me about that, man, that kid's a great kid. Tell me about that kid. And you find, oh, they went to North Greenville. There you go. And so I would love to be able to see that. And then the other thing is that I'm really excited when I think about 10 years from now to know the things that I don't even know now that will happen. And those are the wonderful surprises, right? That you get into the future and you look back and you think, man, I didn't even know that that was possible. Wow. And so I think I have a lot of expectation that the next decade will reveal things that have been in process for a long time, even before I got here. I think about we had a group of students who were here in the late 90s, and it's just astounding now that they're all 40, 45 years old to watch those students now really hitting their stride as incredible leaders. And I look back and think, man, what was going on here 30 years ago, basically, the 25, 30 years ago that was producing that. And I get excited thinking about 10 years from now, finding out what we've been doing now that we didn't even know that we were doing, that we will find out that we were doing. And I think that's a pretty exciting aspect as well.
That is great. Well, Dr. Gene Fant Jr., hey, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. See, this is teaching, right? I love being able to do it and appreciate the opportunity. Always happy to talk about this special place. And we just wish everybody who's listening well, and look forward to hearing about other places as well.
Excellent. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of College Admission TV Presidential Podcast with Dr. Gene Fant Jr., President of North Greenville University. Stay tuned for our next podcast, where we'll sit down with Dr. Catherine Morris, President of St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York.